They weren't just gangsters. They were kings of fear. From the crowded streets of Dublin to the dark alleys of Belfast, a secret empire rose, built not on politics or power, but on blood. They were the Irish Mafia, and their story is far more terrifying than fiction. They ruled with silence, loyalty, and ruthless discipline. To cross them meant death, no second chances, no mercy. Behind every deal, every handshake, and every smile hid a weapon, a plan, and a code. A code that said, betrayal is unforgivable. These men started as small-time hustlers, but soon became legends of terror, controlling drug routes, running weapons, and influencing the very system meant to stop them. The police feared them, the public whispered their names, and their enemies vanished without a trace. But what makes their story truly chilling isn't just their violence, it's their intelligence. They built empires in plain sight, turning nightclubs, construction firms, and boxing promotions into fronts for international crime. This isn't the story of a few criminals. It's the rise of an entire underworld, born in poverty, fueled by revenge, and destined for bloodshed. This is the Real Irish Mafia, unmasking the faces of men who turned Ireland's streets into a battlefield of power and fear. Ireland, a land known for its culture, resilience, and beauty, also hides a darker truth buried beneath its streets. In the 1960s and 70s, Dublin was not just a city of poets and pubs. It was a city of survival. Poverty, corruption, and hopelessness drove young men into the shadows, where loyalty meant more than law, and crime became a way of life. From these broken streets, the Irish Mafia was born. They started small, smuggling cigarettes, robbing banks, running illegal businesses. But soon, their operations evolved into a global criminal network. What began as desperation turned into domination. Figures like Martin Cahill, the Hutch family, and later the Kinahan Cartel became symbols of Ireland's dark transformation. They controlled the underworld with iron fists, rewriting the rules of power and fear. Their wars spilled blood across Europe, from Dublin to Marbella, and their influence reached politicians, police, and even international cartels. But this story isn't just about crime. It's about how ordinary men became legends of terror, how greed, revenge, and power turned Ireland into a battleground of betrayal. In this documentary, we go beyond headlines and police reports, into the hidden corridors of Ireland's criminal empire. This is the untold truth of the Irish Mafia, how it rose, ruled, and left behind a legacy written in blood. It began in the forgotten corners of Dublin, neighborhoods marked by poverty, unemployment, and despair. In the 1960s and 70s, Ireland was struggling. The government's promises faded as quickly as hope in the working-class districts, and for many young men, survival meant breaking the law. The streets became their classrooms, and crime became their only teacher. At first, it was small things, smuggling cigarettes across the northern border, stealing cars, or pulling off petty robberies. But as time passed, the streets changed. The small crews started to unite, forming organized groups that began controlling territories, earning respect through intimidation and fear. This was the birth of Ireland's criminal underworld, the foundation of what would later be known as the Irish Mafia. One of the earliest and most feared names to rise from this chaos was Martin the General Cahill. He wasn't a typical thug. He was clever, disciplined, and absolutely ruthless. Cahill masterminded some of Ireland's biggest heists, from multi-million-pound jewelry robberies to stealing priceless paintings. But more than his crimes, it was his control that made him dangerous. He ruled his gang like a general, punishing betrayal with brutality and rewarding loyalty with fortune. Cahill wasn't alone. In the north side of Dublin, the Hutch family was quietly building their own empire, specializing in robberies and laundering money through legitimate businesses. Across the water, their rivals, who would later form the Kinahan Cartel, were expanding drug routes into Europe, building international connections that would make them untouchable for decades. The police, underfunded and unprepared, struggled to deal with this new kind of criminal. These weren't impulsive street gangs. They were organized, strategic, and fearless. Every time the authorities caught one, another rose in his place. The law was no longer enough to stop the rise of this new power. But what made the Irish Mafia truly unique was its code, a system built on silence, loyalty, and revenge. Betrayal meant death. Talking to the police was worse than a sin. It was a death sentence. This unspoken rule kept the gangs alive and the people terrified. Ordinary citizens learned to look away, to mind their own business, because in Dublin's underworld, knowing too much could get you killed. By the late 1970s, Ireland was no longer just fighting poverty. It was fighting its own monsters. The underworld had taken root deep in the heart of the nation. Nightclubs, pubs, and legit businesses became fronts for money laundering, drug deals, and extortion. And while the government ignored the growing danger, the Irish Mafia only got stronger. Their influence began to seep into politics, policing, and the press. They didn't just control the streets, they controlled the fear that lived in them. From Dublin's back alleys to the docks of Belfast, the message was clear. Ireland had a new kind of ruler. They didn't wear suits or sit in offices. They wore leather jackets, drove stolen cars, and made their fortune in blood. The Irish Mafia wasn't just a gang, it was the birth of an empire that would soon grow beyond Ireland's borders, reshaping the world of organized crime forever. This was just the beginning, the calm before decades of blood, betrayal, and war. In the criminal underworld, loyalty is everything. But in Ireland, that same loyalty became the reason for war. The Irish Mafia wasn't a single organization with one leader. It was a tangled web of families, alliances, and rivalries. Each gang had its own code, its own rules, and its own definition of respect. But as power grew, so did greed. And in a world where loyalty was currency, betrayal came with a price. By the 1990s, Dublin had transformed from a city of opportunity to a battlefield of vengeance. The Hutch family, known for precision robberies and discipline, had built a reputation as professional criminals. They were organized, methodical, and respected. On the other side was the Kinahan family, rising fast in the drug trade, with international contacts and millions at their disposal. At first, the two sides worked together, a fragile peace built on profit. The Kinahans supplied drugs, the Hutches handled the logistics, but alliances built on money never last. One mistake, one betrayal, and everything collapsed. The tension began when a major drug shipment went missing. Millions in product vanished, and each side blamed the other. The streets whispered names, the families exchanged threats, and soon Ireland's most dangerous feud began, the Hutch-Kinahan War. When Gary Hutch, a nephew of Jerry the Monk Hutch, was assassinated in Spain in 2015, the message was clear. The peace was dead. The killing ignited one of the bloodiest gang wars in modern European history. What followed shocked even hardened criminals. The Kinahan Cartel launched revenge attacks with terrifying precision. Assassins disguised as police officers stormed a hotel in Dublin during a boxing weigh-in, killing David Byrne, a key Kinahan ally. That moment, captured on video and broadcast worldwide, became the defining image of Ireland's modern underworld. The Hutch Gang struck back with ambushes, drive-by shootings, and planned executions. Entire neighborhoods became war zones, guarded by armed patrols and CCTV cameras. Families went into hiding. Journalists investigating the feud received death threats. Some even had to flee the country. The Irish public watched in horror as the feud claimed more than 20 lives in just a few years. Each murder was a message, every bullet a warning. Funerals became potential battlegrounds, with police snipers guarding rooftops as gangsters paid their respects. The violence wasn't random, it was strategic. Each killing was designed to dismantle the enemy's trust and weaken their control. But beneath the bloodshed, something deeper was happening. The once unbreakable code of the Irish Mafia was cracking. Informants started to emerge. Fear, once their greatest weapon, began to turn inward. The same loyalty that had built their empire now fueled its destruction. The Hutch-Kinahan feud exposed the underworld for what it truly was. Not a brotherhood, but a kingdom of fear and betrayal. It showed how far men would go to protect their name, their money, and their pride. Even within families, trust disappeared. Cousins plotted against cousins. Old allies became enemies overnight. For the police, it was both a nightmare and an opportunity. As the two gangs destroyed each other, law enforcement finally began to gain ground. Surveillance operations, wiretaps, and international cooperation brought the hidden network of money and murder into the light. But while the authorities celebrated small victories, the streets remembered the cost. Innocent people caught in crossfire, families shattered, entire communities living under the shadow of retribution. The Irish Mafia had always operated by one rule: control through fear. But now, that fear consumed them from within. By the late 2000s, the once glorious empire of the Irish underworld was bleeding from every side. The leaders were hunted, the soldiers were dying, and the code of silence, once sacred, had been broken. And yet, even as bodies fell and alliances crumbled, one truth remained. In Ireland's underworld, there are no friends, only survivors. The blood spilled on those streets would not be forgotten, and the war for power was far from over. As the streets of Dublin ran red with blood, the Irish Mafia looked beyond its borders. The underworld was evolving, and those who survived the local wars knew that the only way to stay alive was to grow bigger, richer, and more connected. The Irish gangs, especially the Kinahan Cartel, began expanding into Europe and beyond, turning a local criminal network into a global enterprise of drugs, money, and murder. At the center of it all was Daniel Kinahan, the son of Christy Kinahan, the man often described by police as the architect of Ireland's modern drug empire. Christy was a businessman in appearance, but a criminal genius in truth. Fluent in multiple languages and highly educated, he understood what most street-level thugs didn't: that real power comes not from guns, but from networks, logistics, and money. By the early 2000s, the Kinahan organization had shifted its base of operations to Spain's Costa del Sol, a sun-drenched paradise that became the meeting point for criminals across Europe. It was the perfect location, luxurious, international, and far from Irish authorities. From there, the cartel built connections with Colombian cocaine producers, Dutch traffickers, and British distributors. The Irish Mafia had officially gone global. Massive shipments of drugs began flowing into Europe, hidden in cargo ships, trucks, and even private planes. The cartel used legitimate businesses to mask their operations: transport companies, real estate, construction, and even sports management firms. Millions of euros were laundered through fake companies, property deals, and offshore bank accounts stretching from the Caribbean to Dubai. But this wasn't just about drugs. The Kinahan network learned to control every level of the trade, from supply to distribution. They managed the ports, the couriers, and even the street dealers. Nothing moved without their permission. The days of small-time smuggling were over. This was organized crime on a multinational scale, and with money came influence. The Irish Mafia began investing in professional boxing, using it as a clean front for their dirty wealth. Daniel Kinahan became a well-known figure in the boxing world, working as a promoter and advisor to some of the sport's biggest names. The media praised him as a businessman, but behind the scenes, investigators knew the truth. The ring was just another way to wash millions in cartel money. Meanwhile, back in Ireland, the Hutch-Kinahan feud continued. Every murder in Dublin or Marbella was another headline, another clue that connected street-level killings to an empire of global crime. The Irish police, working with Europol and Interpol, began piecing together the puzzle. They discovered links between the Kinahan Cartel and Italian mafia groups, Spanish drug lords, and even Eastern European arms dealers. It was clear the Irish Mafia had become one of the most powerful criminal networks in Europe. The scale of their operations shocked even seasoned investigators. A single shipment of cocaine could be worth over 50 million euros. The cartel's total wealth was estimated in the billions. But with global reach came global enemies. Rival gangs in Spain and the Netherlands wanted control of the lucrative trade routes. Cartel meetings turned into ambushes. Trusted partners became informants. Even within the organization, paranoia spread like wildfire. Every phone call could be tapped. Every visitor could be a spy. The once unified cartel started showing cracks. Some members wanted to legitimize their businesses and escape the bloodshed. Others wanted more power, more money, and total dominance. The police were closing in, and for the first time, the empire felt vulnerable. In 2022, the U.S. government officially sanctioned the Kinahan Cartel, labeling it as a major transnational criminal organization. Bounties of up to $5 million were placed on key members, including Daniel Kinahan himself. Overnight, the empire that once operated in the shadows was thrust into the global spotlight. Luxury mansions were seized, bank accounts frozen, and allies began disappearing. The cartel's global network, built over decades, was crumbling under the weight of international pressure. Yet, even then, whispers remained. Daniel Kinahan vanished from public view, rumored to be hiding in Dubai, still pulling strings behind closed doors. Despite the arrests, the seizures, and the headlines, investigators admitted one chilling truth. The Kinahan network wasn't dead, just hidden. From Dublin to Dubai, from blood-soaked streets to billion-dollar deals, the Irish Mafia had transformed itself into something far more dangerous than anyone imagined. A criminal corporation without borders, without mercy, and without fear. And as history has shown, when the Irish Mafia loses ground, it doesn't surrender. It adapts. The world thought the war was over. But for the Irish underworld, it was only entering its next phase, a battle for global dominance that would soon return home. Every empire built on blood eventually drowns in it. And the Irish Mafia was no exception. For decades, their power seemed unshakable. They had money, influence, and fear on their side. But behind the walls of wealth and silence, cracks began to form. Betrayal, the one thing they feared most, started from within. It wasn't the police or politicians that brought the Irish Mafia to its knees. It was its own people, the insiders who had seen too much, lost too much, and finally decided to talk. Informants, once sworn to secrecy, began turning against the families that raised them. Undercover agents infiltrated the networks, recording conversations, tracking money trails, and connecting murders to men who thought they were untouchable. The Criminal Assets Bureau, CAB, established in Ireland in the late 1990s, became one of the Mafia's deadliest enemies. Instead of chasing killers, they went after what gangsters valued most: money. Mansions, cars, and businesses worth millions were seized overnight. The lavish lifestyles that once symbolized power now exposed their corruption. One by one, the Irish Mafia's leaders fell. Some were gunned down in Spain and Portugal, victims of revenge or fear. Others were arrested in international stings, betrayed by their own lieutenants. The Kinahan Cartel, once considered invincible, faced massive international pressure, with Europol, Interpol, and the U.S. Treasury joining forces to dismantle the empire. Daniel Kinahan, once seen ringside at global boxing events, vanished. Christy Kinahan, the father of the empire, went into hiding. Their faces, once symbols of terror, became targets of global arrest warrants. The fall was swift, brutal, and inevitable. But even in their downfall, the Irish Mafia left chaos behind. Their drug routes didn't vanish. They were taken over by smaller, more violent groups. The streets of Dublin were quieter, but the shadows remained alive. Every time one cartel fell, another was ready to take its place. The media called it the end of an era. But for those who knew the underworld, it wasn't an end. It was an evolution. The faces had changed. The methods had modernized. But the code of silence and fear still ruled. The Irish Mafia's empire may have crumbled, but its influence lived on. In the money still hidden, in the lives destroyed, and in the legends that refused to die. The fall wasn't the full stop of their story. It was only the beginning of their transformation. From gangsters in the streets to ghosts in the system. Even after decades of arrests, assassinations, and betrayals, the story of the Irish Mafia refuses to end. The guns may have gone silent, but the fear they created still echoes through Ireland's streets. What began in poverty and desperation became a legacy that shaped generations. A warning, a curse, and a reminder that power built on violence never truly dies. In Dublin, people still whisper the names Kinahan, Hutch, and Cahill like ghosts from the past. Their stories are told in pubs, newsrooms, and police files, not as history, but as cautionary tales. To some, they were monsters. To others, they were legends, men who defied the system and built empires from nothing. That's the chilling part of their legacy. For a few, crime became a symbol of strength, of rebellion against a world that offered them no future. The Kinahan-Hutch feud, though it officially ended, left permanent scars. Families were torn apart. Innocent people were caught in the crossfire. Children grew up without fathers, mothers lived in fear, and entire communities learned that silence was safer than truth. Even now, some neighborhoods in Dublin carry an unspoken rule. Don't ask, don't talk, don't remember. But the Irish Mafia's influence goes far beyond Ireland. Their methods changed how organized crime operates across Europe. They taught other criminal groups how to launder money through businesses, move drugs across borders, and use digital networks to hide millions. In a strange way, the Irish underworld became a blueprint for the global age of organized crime. Smarter, more connected, and far harder to catch. And while the old gang lords faded into hiding or prison, a new generation quietly emerged. They don't carry guns in the open or leave trails of blood on the streets. Instead, they use technology, cryptocurrencies, and offshore companies to build invisible empires. The same ruthless ambition that fueled the old mafia now runs through their veins. Only this time, it's hidden behind computer screens and luxury offices. Law enforcement knows this evolution too well. The Criminal Assets Bureau, Europol, and Interpol continue to chase the money, the connections, and the ghosts of the past. Every year, new names appear in reports, new gangs, new deals, new routes. But the same bloodline of fear continues. It's as if the Irish Mafia never truly ended. It simply learned how to survive in silence. Culturally, their shadow lingers in Ireland's identity. Movies, books, and documentaries keep retelling their story, sometimes glorifying it, sometimes condemning it, but never forgetting it. The image of the Irish gangster, sharp, fearless, and loyal to no one, has become part of the nation's dark folklore. It's the story of a people torn between pride and shame, between survival and destruction. Yet the truest legacy of the Irish Mafia isn't in headlines or films. It's in the quiet trauma left behind. In children who learned to run when cars slowed down. In families who still hide their last names. In the empty chairs at kitchen tables where brothers, sons, and fathers once sat. The Irish Mafia ruled through fear, but fear has a long memory. It doesn't die when the gangsters do. It lives in the people who remember. It lingers in every street that once echoed with gunfire, in every mother who still waits for justice that never came. And maybe that's the real tragedy, because for all their power, money, and terror, the Irish Mafia left behind nothing but pain, and a question that still haunts Ireland today. Was it worth it? Their story began with hunger and ambition and ended with blood and silence. Yet, as long as there are those who believe power is worth any price, as long as the poor still dream of fortune and revenge, another Irish Mafia will rise again. Different faces, same fear. The empire may have fallen, but its legacy, the legacy of fear, lives on forever.